Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on on your time zone. My name is Seth Early, and welcome to our December webinar, which is on product recommendations. Actually, it's around all sorts of recommendations, and it's about understanding the customer, anticipating their needs, and then providing some information based on the signals, based on what they're doing, based on how they're interacting, reading their digital body language. And I'm here with Dave Scribella, our Managing Director and Client Partner. Dave, do you want to say hello?
Hey everybody, Dave Scribella, Managing Director with Early Information Science. I've been with Early for about 4.5 years, have worked on a number of very large client projects where recommendations have come into play. We've both implemented and developed strategies, so happy to share more of our thinking around what's working in the marketplace and what we think and have seen has worked very well for our clients.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. And by the way, we are a professional services firm. I sometimes forget to. I assume people know who we are. We don't make a living just by doing webinars. We are a professional services firm, and we help people actually do this work and solve these problems. So we've got a pretty extensive agenda. What is a recommendation engine? Personalization versus recommendations. Really important about understanding the customer, building attributes, building profile data, and your path to first-party data. There was a very interesting article in the Wall Street Journal just last Friday, and I'm going to quote it a little later. I don't want to steal my thunder, but it's really about, with all these changes in technology, with the elimination of cookies and with privacy regulations, both so things that are happening on the technology front and the government front and the regulatory front. First-party data, meaning you understanding your customers and building those attributes and building those rich profiles, is critical. It's critical for everything you're going to be doing. So we're going to talk about that a good bit. In fact, maybe I should have named this webinar about first-party data. But and then we're going to talk about the different ways, the different mechanisms, the different digital machinery behind providing recommendations. We'll talk about an orchestration model, which is something that we've worked on for a number of years that requires maturity in a number of different areas. And then thinking about, well, what do you need to have? What do you have to have in place to make this stuff work? And then we have a getting started offer. When we think about recommendation engine, what is a recommendation engine? What does it mean? How do they work? And what is the value of this? And when you think about recommendations, it's really making it's taking something you know about the customer and anticipating a need. So presenting something for them, presenting an option, a piece of content, a product. And now a lot of people confuse personalization with recommendation. Well, they're very similar. Personalization may not include a recommendation. Recommendation is personalized, right? A recommendation is based on something you know about somebody. Now, the degree of personalization, you could say if I'm doing shopping cart analysis and I am making a recommendation and it's just based on the data, is that personalized? Maybe not. Maybe it's a generalized recommendation. But the point here is that I can say, if I use somebody's name and location and some information I know about them, I can have a personalized communication. When I do that to anticipate or suggest something, so the first one does not have a recommendation. The second one does. It has personalization and it has recommendation. A recommendation is about a product because we know something about you, because we know that you have purchased one in the past. So when you start thinking about this, there's a number of different ways to do this. You can do it based on preferences, right? You can make some recommendations based on the things that people say they prefer. If they prefer a certain type of content, technical content, you can make a recommendation based on that, based on the preference. You can make it based on past behaviors, either past behaviors of that individual or past behaviors of groups, similar customers with similar types of behaviors. We can also make a recommendation based on product relationships. Now, a lot of these can be combined in different ways. So we can have packages and we can say, well, this package is based on what this person has purchased in the past, but we also know that this person is technical in nature. So we can take these combinations of pieces and use them together. And then there's this concept of real-time digital body language, which takes all of those pieces. It takes product relationships, it takes information about preferences, about past behaviors, about similar customers, and it uses that to respond in real time. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But again, the level of of depth and the level of complexity and the level of capability varies, right? Some things are very easy to do. It's easy to pop in a first name, right? It's harder to anticipate what people need. So when you think about what a recommendation actually is, it's a suggestion based on the stage of the customer's journey, based on where they are in that journey. It's anticipation of a need or a set of needs. And when you consider that, it is always based on context, it is always based on who you are, what you're trying to accomplish, where you are in that decision-making process or that information gathering process. So a recommendation in context is a form of personalization, right? Because we're taking that. And what are the contexts? What are the different types of context we have? Well, I mentioned preferences. We can also say location is a context, so I can make a recommendation about something near you. Industry is part of context. I can recommend things about your industry, language, demographics. Again, the things that are job role, your interests, your objectives, but then things that are moving more quickly, like downloads and searches and conversions and bounces and all of that is telling us something about you. You abandon the shopping cart. That is context, right? We can tailor something to try to get you back. So when you start considering this in terms of your user, what we're really trying to do is represent that user and that context and those preferences all in terms of their data, right? Your systems respond to data. Your systems can interpret and understand and act on data. So we need to represent context and preferences and that state of mind and that state of need in terms of a metadata model, in terms of the data model that helps us collect those signals. And as people interact, that data model changes, right? That data model is going to change depending upon where they are in that process and what they're trying to do. And when you consider how people solve their problem, one of the things that we're doing is we're thinking about their mental model. So we're trying to align the way we organize information with their mental model. Now, here's something I mentioned at the start. This just came out on Friday in a Wall Street Journal article. New privacy protections put in place by tech giants and governments threatening the flow of user data that people use to target customers. Marketers are rushing to collect their own information, seeking to build detailed customer profiles. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about harvesting your customer data, your digital body language to build a rich profile of your customer. So how do we learn about the customer? Well, we can capture any information about them throughout their entire life cycle. Of course, we can enrich with third-party data sources, and that's becoming more difficult. We can observe behaviors, and we can infer something about them. We can say, well, these are people buying, over and over again. Well, they're a loyal customer, they're a repeat buyer. What can we do to maintain that loyalty? And every time a customer interacts with your organization, they are doing it through technologies that are enabling that customer experience. There's tools and technologies, touch points. Every time we do something, every time we open an email, every time we go to a website, every time we respond to a campaign, that is telling us, that is throwing off information. And I like to say it's the data exhaust of those systems. Those systems produce data when people are interacting. Now, how do we describe them? We describe them in various parameters and various attributes. It's a new customer, it's an old customer, it's a large one, it's repeat, it's one time. They're professional, they're consumer, they're bargain hunters, they're in a particular segment or industry. And again, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to pull those details, those attributes, that metadata, those descriptors of the customer are coming from the tools and the systems that they interact with. Maybe they'll answer a survey or a question or fill out a profile, but then there's also stuff that they're doing. And from that digital body language, we are able to build that model. And again, what we want to do is we want to have it consistent because different systems will describe the customer in different ways. So we want to learn about them, we want to describe them, and then we can start to think about, well, what are these different things? Now, I was looking at ways to produce recommendations and ways to produce, personalization. And some people were saying, here's 5 different ways. And they'd list each one of those attributes? Well, I look at it more generally. I say, well, what are their preferences, right? How do they want to be served? What specific choices do they have or have they made in the past? What do you want to have consistent throughout that journey across those interactions? So how they want to be served. I love the fact when I get into an Uber or Lyft, I always say quiet and cool. And I can say most of the time, maybe, I don't know, I would say that most of the time it is not observed. It is not respected. They don't act on that. So one of the things to know about preferences is if you capture preferences, act on them, right? Don't ignore them. So window or aisle seat, vegetarian meal, queen size bed, whatever it is, location, your preferred airport, your desired communication channel, other choices. These again become preferences and you can act on those preferences. So when you start representing this in a data model, again, we can start thinking about the customer. You can think about these as attributes, right? As fields of metadata about the customer that we can start populating as we gain more information. And this should be something that happens on an ongoing basis. So you can start to represent this, and this is just a mind map of these. But you know, the prior one were the preferences. Now this is more about the account itself, right? What kind of customer is it? What kind of equipment? You know, what are the account details, their plans, their billing? You know, if it's consumer, what type of consumer? If it's a business, what type of business? What are the firmographics, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we can start to capture that information about them. And then we can start to add more to it. This is starting to become very involved and very complex because psychographics, behavioral segmentation, loyalty, social media, these are, again, are signals that come in from your different touch points, from your different systems that detect that digital body language. And then the question is, what do we do with that? So when you build these models, they can become very involved, right? These are all hierarchies, by the way, when you think about it, and they can all be described as metadata. So this is a customer data model, just like we build product data models, we build content models, we build customer models, customer data models. And again, every touch point, every point in their journey is a signal that we want to capture. This is how our systems see the customer. They see them in terms of metadata. Now, some of it changes slowly, some of it changes quickly. When we talk about orchestration a little bit later, this is going to be very important because we can do certain things based on what we know that's fairly stable, right? We know that they're with this company and job function and position and department and so on. And others, and it'll change, but it'll change at a slower rate. There's stuff that changes real time and near real time, right? Their intent, their social media interaction, responses to campaigns, click streams, purchases, conversions, all of those types of things change the metadata model much more quickly. And we're going to come back to this and show you exactly how we use this to build this. Now, you can start to consider customer maturity, customer information maturity. First of all, you know, are you capturing stuff, right? Are you capturing the data and are you centralizing that data? You know, are you able to segment in a meaningful way? A lot of segmentation is done in a manner that's what we refer to in taxonomy as pre-coordinated. Like if you had every possible navigation choice for, you know, shirts, small shirts, medium shirts, large shirts, and then you had small red shirts, small blue shirts, small, you know, green shirts, and then you had medium green shirts. I mean, that's how a lot of segmentation is done. I want a CIO in the Midwest who is in the market for routers, right? That is pre-coordinated. What we want to do is separate those into multiple facets. So there's a lot of work that we can do to build more sophisticated models of the audience so that we can match the attributes of the audience to the attributes of the content and the product attributes. Again, I'm not going to go into this in a great deal of detail, but we're going to run a webinar on this very specifically in the near future. But again, what we want to do is to get there is inventory those systems. What are those systems that are capturing that information? How do they describe the customer? What are the descriptors within those systems, right? Is it account name? Is it account underscore name? Is it name? You know, even those simple descriptors have to be harmonized. We have to deduplicate our customer records. A lot of people, we just finished a big customer data cleansing project that also allowed us to build these very sophisticated attribute models. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to dedupe and to cleanse and to make sure it's up to date. I love when I get 5 or 10 letters from some company marketing to people in my company that were gone 5 years ago, right? I mean, obviously they're buying a list, but it's not up to date. And so we have to do this. We have to map those data flows. How is that customer data interpreted and acted upon in different systems? And then, as I say, it's building this data model that incorporates those signals. We build out, based on those descriptors, segmentation models. And we have to understand those needs. We have to understand those objectives. We have to build those scenarios and those use cases to test out what we understand about those models. And then, of course, we have to be able to capture performance metrics. Once we build our customer data model and we test it with some certain types of offers or certain types of specialized treatment and recommendations, we have to iterate. We have to shampoo, rinse, repeat. So again, that's the big picture view of this. We're going to dive into some of these details. So thinking about recommendation approaches, there's really 3 broad buckets, right? There's statistical approaches, there's structural techniques, and there's real-time data. And this is not meant to be, a clear delineation. You can kind of overlap in these different areas, but broadly speaking, we go from easier to more difficult. And there are different factors involved. So let's start off with things like, and an example of statistical is shopping basket analysis. So basically you're trying to look at purchases, prior purchases. Maybe these are products that are in combination. Maybe they're products that have characteristics that are purchased together. Maybe they're products that are purchased by related types of populations or unrelated populations. You just say, across all of our product data, it's very product focused. All the transactions, here's what's been purchased together. And that's why you go to Amazon and say, people who bought this also bought this. Now, you can take it to a finer degree of granularity by saying, engineers, if you have that descriptor, you can start to segment that shopping basket analysis and those groupings according to other characteristics. So this is why these things work together. So it's still statistical, but you're saying, I'm going to incorporate not just this statistical method of product combinations or shopping cart combinations across all my customers. I'm going to segment it across customers that are more like this individual. The more we know about that individual, the more carefully we can do that. So we can have a delineation between one type of customer and another. And again, what this does is it allows us to be able to take those purchases and cluster them in different ways and align them with other types of purchases and other types of audiences. And then what happens is when there's a missing piece, if you say, well, all the other hundreds or thousands of people who have purchased these products, you only have 2 out of the 3 that they all purchased. So let's recommend that third product. So again, looks at groups that are purchased together, looks at those in related segments, compares it to other purchase combinations. And again, when we start to add those other signals, it gets more precise, it gets more accurate. And again, we can start to also look at this from the perspective of structural relationships of products. They call a priori information. What do you know ahead of time versus what are you discovering? And sometimes there's characteristics across groups that may not be readily discernible by a human, but a computer, a machine learning algorithm can find those relationships. They're called latent attributes. Latent Dirichlet allocation is the name of that. But it's subtle information about the fingerprint of the customer, the data fingerprint of the customer, and it can help us predict product relationships and products that are appropriate. And then there's some algorithms that will look at that and then introduce randomization. It'll introduce, like Netflix does this. It'll look at your past behaviors. It'll look at people with similar behaviors. It'll start to give you recommendations. And then once in a while, it throws in some randomized piece and sees how that performs. So you're always introducing new information, not just basing it on prior information. Now, I'm going to turn this over to Dave to talk a little bit about the structural types of techniques. And this is relationships between products. These are relationships between, as you see. So Dave, why don't I let you take it from here?
Thanks, Seth. So when we talk about structural techniques, we are relying on the knowledge of people who own and are responsible for bringing and managing products to the marketplace. So that's based on, individual or group and collective business priorities, strategic product placement, and promotional campaigns, and of course, customer behavior, because you want to collect a lot of that information from actual and potential future customer behavior. So the importance of product relationships when we're working with our clients, it's all about understanding the different types of relationships, but really starting with why are they important? Because this does require a fair amount of involvement from some of your product and marketing teams. They're important because ultimately good relationships and relationships that drive recommendations are going to increase conversion and revenue across your site and channels. You're going to see an increase in return visit, generally a higher level of customer satisfaction as part of that experience. Better recommendations generally lead to higher satisfaction scores and NPS scores. The overall discovery and navigation as you're moving your customers and users through a product catalog is improved. Your customers are exposed to different parts of your product catalog. So for big retailers, even big manufacturers and distributors, good recommendations will, show them parts of the catalog and the breadth and depth that they weren't previously aware of. It also helps when you're syndicating to channel partners. So, this is a good chance to use some of those recommended accessories or replacement types of relationships and really make sure that your distributors have access to high quality information. Customer self-service enablement, right? So as people are looking at specific use cases to support products that are already installed or available with customers, how can structured relationships and product relationships help to enable that experience? Your customer support and engineering team having access to that relationships data is really critical. And also pricing optimization. As you're looking at some of these relationships, how do you optimize price based on some information that you might have available through competitive benchmarking? So the benefits, of course, increasing cart size and average order value. These are things as we launch and build some of these relationships and recommendations capabilities with clients, we actually do want to benchmark and measure over time. Additional convenience to the customer does create that loyalty aspect. Getting click history and really being able to spend time analyzing that clickstream behavior will help you with your taxonomy and your catalog online. How can you improve and see areas for improvement? Linking to other category sites to grow awareness. So again, it's really using relationships and recommendations to take people from one part, the navigation experience in your catalog, and recommending some other areas based on where they are. And finally, creating a perception of other products is really important as well, right? You want to open up and raise the awareness around opportunities. So some common types of relationships, these are not an exhaustive list, but ones that are generally at the top for companies that are getting started or need to evolve some of the recommendations and product relationships that they're launching into their digital channels. Accessories, right? And they take two forms here, the required and optional. So if you look at the required, you've got bags and filters. You need something for the base products to work appropriately. So what are sort of the required accessories? Every flashlight is going to need batteries. So, what better way to kind of start building the relationships and recommendations if you're operating an e-commerce experience and you're selling a flashlight? Recommend those batteries because they're going to need them. Optionally, right? Not necessarily to make a base product functionally work, but what something will improve the effectiveness or completeness of the experience. We call these optional accessories. They're going to really, enhance the overall customer experience and the experience with those products. So getting those set up and understanding the difference and making sure that your customers understand the difference is critical. Compatible products, right? So products that are used in conjunction with the base product, generally important in industrial areas and in industrial context. But also think about some of your relationships between hardware and software components. Those are things that are essentially set up as product relationships. And replacement parts, right? So these are things that operating any complex machinery are always going to be essential. So your spare parts, I think about my own experience in my house, got a lot of really fancy hardware in my bathrooms and kitchen. It's hard to find replacements for that. So having actual access to structured relationships so I can sort of do the discovery and investigation without calling a million different support centers is really important. So, where can you find those replacement parts, and can you trust that, the parts recommended for those base product are in fact the right ones that you need to purchase?
What's really interesting, I'll just give a quick color note here, is that these are usually buried somewhere in specifications and product builds of materials and diagrams and what I was trying to, speaking of bathrooms, I was trying to replace one of the actually valvey part of the sink faucet. There's all the outside, and then there's just this core cartridge that goes into it. And when I was talking to them, they said, "Oh no, not that knowledge base, not that knowledge base, no, not that product catalog, no, over here." Because I found the wrong relationships in like 3 different places, and they had to tell me where to go in this really deep buried place to find the actual correct relationship. But it was documented in multiple places incorrectly. Think about the overhead to that. Think about the inconvenience. Think about the cost to that support. It was horrendous, but it was all based on, the data.
Yep, absolutely. So some other common types of product relationships, we talk about alternate products, recommended substitutes based on availability or current seasonality constraints. I think this probably makes a lot of sense today and where we are with some of our supply chain challenges and issues. As consumers, we want to look for products that we want to buy. And if we cannot actually make those purchases, what are good recommended alternates, right? So that's something that certainly broad and large scale retailers and distributors need to think about more and more in terms of just thinking through seasonality and some of the issues with supply chain constraints. Recommended categories. This is one that pretty easy to set up. The lift compared to sort of the effort involved is fairly significant and positive. So if they're in specific categories, link them to other suggested categories. Your catalog is going to be organized based on some principles that make sense for your customer experience, but that doesn't mean that you don't want to immediately be able to provide some quick linkage to other parts of that catalog. And those are really done through recommendations. And finally, upsells. Upsells are clearly an area where you can say, if I have this product, what other types of products or bundles might I recommend and suggest that will help increase my chances at higher levels of revenue, and of course, provide some sort of side-by-side feature comparison and benefit articulation as you go through that upsell experience. So challenges using product relationships for recommendations. This is, I kind of led off with, these are ones that are more often than not curated at first, and over time still require a certain level of training and curation. So you can't necessarily just depend on statistical approaches and algorithms. You do need the subject matter expertise, some of the tacit knowledge that is embedded across your organization to make sure these recommendations are set up correctly and are in fact behaving correctly. Deriving some of the functional and merchandising relationships can be a time-intensive exercise. What Seth was just talking about, going back and sort of mining old specifications, documentations, or old knowledge-based materials that might not be accessible to a large organization anymore, does require a little bit of knowledge extraction, and you have to make sure the right people are connected with the right information to drive that forward. And this is where you can start to build some machine learning approaches, but they're not going to be imperfect. So having sort of the human in the loop and pairing up the knowledge experts with the algorithms are very critical to ensuring you've got a good experience and a good approach.
And I'll tell you, Dave, you really point out this other super important issue, which is the knowledge extraction and the knowledge integration, and serving up that knowledge in the right context. And we're going to talk about that shortly. But I think that's a big looming need of every organization, especially when we try to automate more of those customer interactions, right? What happens when your product experts who know all those combinations, that call center rep who I spoke to, who knew exactly where to find it? What happens when those people leave, or they retire, they move to a different job? The curation, codification, management of knowledge, and especially thinking about new formats of componentized knowledge is very, very important. And it's a big problem that's going to be even bigger as companies begin to scramble to do this, because they're going to need it in their digital experiences, their digital channels, especially with virtual assistants. And we have a whole philosophy on that we can dig into. So let's talk about, thank you, Dave. Let's talk about taking those pieces and kind of combining them in different ways, and thinking about how we use those real-time digital signals, that digital body language, those customer signals throughout that journey. And when we think about this is, again, it's understanding of the customer. It's being able to look at real-time behavior. It's combining that with the profile data, and it's being able to start offering things up in a much more dynamic way. And when we talked about this, I've mentioned this multiple times, but the marketing stack, that marketing technology ecosystem, is the thing. That's what's providing, that's what's capturing those signals, right? The customers are interacting, and you have to take that data exhaust, right? That data exhaust from these technologies and combine those and capture them, not throw them away. There was a great article in the Wall Street Journal that mentioned the one I referred to before, and mentioned that in one field promotion organization, they were doing things at local establishments, and they were getting all of these filled out forms and slips to enter contest, and had all of this customer data. And they asked the proprietor of this location, the store, this wasn't corporate, well, what do you do with all that when you're done? They go, oh, we just throw it away. Just throw it away. Throw it away. No, well, you're doing the same thing with your technologies today when you're not capturing this and harvesting it, integrating it, and getting that historical record. You're throwing it away. So you have to not throw it away, right? These signals can be correlated with lots of different things. They can be correlated with, revenue, even if it's going through a channel, a distribution channel. It can look at different types of conversions. We're looking at responses to promotions, to offerings. So we have to evaluate that digital ecosystem, all those touch points. We have a whole approach for that. We have an assessment to do that, and understand that metadata and understand that data exhaust and how we can leverage it. So again, this stuff is happening across all of those tools. And we know in a lot of organizations, they're very fragmented. So when you start thinking about this from this orchestration perspective, again, the orchestration is taking those signals and it's responding. So we really need to understand the journey in data terms. We need to understand the audience goals and buying stage in terms of data. What does it represent? What is that journey? What do they need? How do they go through it? What's their mental model? And the customer data, again, I've been talking about gathering from the different touch points. Product data, we have to have the right product attributes available to different audiences. If we're trying to, make a recommendation for somebody who's a design engineer, it's going to be different from someone who's a procurement manager. They're going to need different things. Maybe a design engineer cares more about the functionality of the product they're buying, and the procurement person is more interested in supply chain issues and life and the total cost of maintaining this component, and other types of reliability and performance metrics and pricing and so on. And then the content, we need to make sure that the content is enabling this. This is why knowledge, content, customer data, and product data all have to be considered. And the knowledge is really the insight, the expertise from the human experts, the merchandisers that Dave had mentioned, the product managers that Dave had mentioned. So all of these things are very important. Now, I talked before about the fact that some metadata is slow moving, some metadata is fast moving. And the stuff that we know about the account may change, but it's going to change more slowly. The stuff that they're doing real time, it's like having a conversation with somebody, that's moving really quickly, right? The interactions, the click-throughs, and so on. So we refer to this as a high fidelity journey map. And the reason why is it's identifying those details of the customer, and it's defining the content that they need, and it's defining it in a way that we can act on those signals. So think about this. Here's our customer. When we built that attribute model, and that attribute model, I'm going to call it static or slow moving here, contains the information in the profile that we can act on, industry, role, interest, right? We can start personalizing and making recommendations just on that. But that's slow moving metadata. We also have the dynamic metadata, the fast moving metadata, that those responses, click-throughs, and so on. And so at each stage, when you think about it, this metadata model changes as the customer interacts. When they download a white paper, you can see that little piece of that metadata model changed. And what we do is we consolidate that through something like a customer data platform. It doesn't have to be a customer data platform, but each time we do this, you can see that there's a little area highlighted in that metadata model up here that changes. And that is the real-time digital body language. That is the high fidelity journey model. When we understand the audience's needs in terms of metadata. Now, so here's what happens. When we go through this process, I download a white paper, our knowledge architecture and our knowledge and insights say that's top of the funnel content. And we take that signal and we apply it to making a recommendation. Now they're downloading the white paper, but we're also going to give them an offer. We're also going to make that a particular product offer that is based on their interest, what they indicated. Now, if they do something else, if they're comparing, well, we know that that's middle of the funnel content from, again, the customer experts and the merchandising experts. We take that signal speaks to the product information management system, and it speaks to the content management system, and it starts to give them additional recommendations. Again, this is based on that real-time body language. Downloading a guide, that's post-purchase content. This is the installation. Same idea. Well, what are we going to suggest to them? Maybe we want to give them that installation guide, but make a recommendation about a particular piece of content or another piece of a product. So again, post-purchase nurture, let's give them user tips, how to get the most from your widget. And by the way, here's a super widget you might want to get, and we only extend this to customers who we currently work with. So this, again, is how those pieces come together. The customer data model, the knowledge architecture, the knowledge and the insights, the product data and product data representation, the attribute models, and then the content. So we need to have maturity in these different areas. We need to make sure that that customer data is consistent, it's harmonized, it is modeled that in a way that is meaningful so that we can act on those signals. The content has to be findable, obviously internally, but it also has to be relevant and presented to the customer in the right context. And many times what we do is we build these as components so that we can assemble. This is a simplified model that you gave you today, but we can actually assemble customized dynamic content using a messaging architecture and a component modeling architecture. I mentioned the product data models have to be aligned with the attributes that are important. The knowledge ties it together. And then we have to measure all this stuff. We have to have a metrics-driven governance decision-making model, a playbook, if you will. that helps us determine if our assumptions are working. And this actually will help us make decisions. It'll help us determine if the recommendation algorithm is working, right? Are we getting value from this, or is our approach working? And again, we have to have maturity across these different areas. So this is our orchestration maturity model. And essentially what this is saying is that you need content capabilities, you need content optimization, content operations capabilities, and those have multiple dimensions. We need to have that depth of maturity about our customer data, both in terms of building a meaningful, useful attribute model, but at the same time, being able to consolidate those signals from different systems. And sometimes people have multiple systems to do social media monitoring. They have multiple systems for email management. They have multiple systems for, all sorts of things. And we have to find a way to harmonize that and to combine them. I mentioned product data operations, product catalog operations, product onboarding. All those product attributes have to be aligned and in good shape. And then we have to be able to collaborate and share knowledge up and down the food chain. I have a diagram or an animation that I show sometimes with this, and it shows that there's a lot of moving parts. And when we have people unable to find the stuff they need to produce their output, when they have to search around, email people, when they have to recreate stuff or go to different repositories, that puts friction in this whole process. And we can't have our acts of heroics upstream and have a seamless customer experience externally. This shows an organization where they might be today in a starting point, how good they are at content management, how good they are at customer data management, how strong they are in product information and knowledge. And then it talks about where they need to be. Doesn't always mean you need to be stage 5, but in some cases you do. And when you do projects, we actually move people through this maturity model toward that end state. And again, it's really understanding those needs and how those product features meet those needs and how the technology can serve that. Really, you're not thinking about technology first. You're thinking about the customer first. You're thinking about what the customer needs and understanding, true personalization from just a customer audience perspective. Like, what do we know about our customers? What do we know about our segments? How can we describe those audiences? And how do we describe them in metadata terms? That's what needs to happen. And then the technology comes from there. So when you think about this, you need a number of things. This is a little bit of a complex table, and you can have this for reference, but you need models, unified models. You need some expertise or services or whatever, whether you do it internally or externally, and you need standard platforms and processes. So I've already mentioned this around customer data. You need those journey models. You need the customer attribute model. You need some mechanism for consolidating that. You need some mechanism for modeling this and doing this across systems. You have to have a standardized profile. You have to understand what those patterns mean and understand what those signals are, how they get reconciled from multiple systems. If they're opening and clicking through something versus they're answering a phone call from a sales rep, well, how do those align, right? Those are two different, that's apples and baseball bats. So we have to find a way to say, well, how do we act on those signals and what's the equivalence of this? What does that mean in terms of our customer engagement? And again, there's a number of pieces to this around componentized content, depending upon how advanced we need to get. Componentized content is important no matter what. It's going to be important for building question answering systems. It's going to be important for powering chatbots and virtual assistants. It's going to be important for personalization and recommendations. And the farther you go down that path, the more prepared you'll be for this coming deluge of opportunities around building out virtual assistants. Virtual assistants are not very good today. This is not the topic today, but they're going to be good in the next several years. We're going to have them be ubiquitous, and organizations need to manage their content, componentize their content in order to power those. And then, of course, the product architecture, as I mentioned, we have to have display hierarchies that are optimized for those customer journeys. We need to have the back-end product onboarding process that allows us to capture the attributes that are important. We need to have metrics around our decision-making, metrics around our product data. And again, we need to be able to and support that product data with rich media, whether those are images, whether those are installation guides, whether those are other types of videos or whatever it is. Those have to be there, but then we also have to be able to have those product relationships, those merchandising bundles, those solution bundles, as Dave has mentioned. And then the knowledge and insights. This is all along that food chain, from product conceptualization all the way through a launch on a website or launch in the marketplace. There's knowledge that has to be shared up and down that food chain, and we need to be able to centralize it. We need to be able to have a handle on it. We need to make it findable for all the different parties, and then we need to be able to surface that in the right context during that journey and act on the insights from analytics so that we can apply our knowledge and judgment to making these decisions and to building these systems. So, and Dave, did you want to add anything to this slide? I know I went through it pretty quickly. Any color commentary or observations?
Well, it's a lot, right? And you don't necessarily have to take all of this on at once, right? You have to think about incrementally where you want to start and what you want that end customer experience to look like. Yes, so just keep that in mind. This is a journey. This is not a 3-month project.
No, this is a journey, and this can be your North Star. So keep that in mind that many of these things are aspirational, but it requires a lot of foundational elements. And clean data is the cost of admission, but you can start to benchmark maturity. You can start to build a plan based on that maturity, right? You don't want to try to bite off more than you can chew. You don't want to get ahead of your skis, whatever your metaphor is. You want to bite off your skis or get ahead of your, anyway. But my point is that this has to be done in the context of what you're capable of today, and then maturing those capabilities so that you can build more advanced stuff. And this aspirational functionality can be the North Star. It can be built, but having consistent wins along the way. If you're building out your knowledge repositories, there's a lot of short-term value that comes from that. If you're building out content processes, there's a lot of value. It's not just about SEO. It's really about orchestrating that content in the right context. But all of these things can provide short-term value while you're working toward this future state. It is very iterative. And these are issues that need to be addressed no matter where you are in your journey, no matter where you're going, and whether you have ambitious aspirations or more conservative. Dave, do you want to talk just a moment about this? This is our offer around kind of understanding maturity.
Yeah, so Seth mentioned the importance of just getting a handle on your overall marketing technology stack, right? So we've got an offering to come in and do a quick but very comprehensive evaluation of your marketing technology, looking at the technology itself, of course, thinking about user and customer experience, business strategy, looking at the content and data, thinking through the future state where you want it to be, really in alignment with kind of overall business and product strategy. And that helps to give us a sense of, okay, where is your maturity in terms of current state, future state? What does the gap look like? We develop a little bit of a scorecard and blueprint for planning out the future. And a lot of this is, can be very focused on personalization and recommendations, because in a lot of ways, the more personalized and the more empowered by recommendations your future digital and omni-channel experience for your customers is, the more you're set up to win. I think we can kind of just put it as plainly as that. So this is generally a 4-week offering, which gives you a lot of insight into where you are, maybe leading, maybe on par, or maybe lagging behind sort of the overall industry for the capabilities related to personalization and recommendations.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is because there's usually a lot of overlap between systems, we have a method that shows you how to score that overlap and understand the boundaries of functionality and how well you're using it and whether you should be moving in one direction or another direction, but part of it is harmonizing and rationalizing that ecosystem, right? Because there's a lot of tools out there that people have. Now, someone had a quick question that said, unified models can sound very scary, right? Because if we're trying to unify this stuff, it may entail the concept of new technology. But what we're saying is the unified models have to start out from a design perspective, and then they inform your development, right? They inform your technology. So technology comes last, but the needs of the customer and the descriptors and the modeling of those customers. And again, it's looking at the different systems saying, how inconsistent is our definition of a customer, and how are those customer attributes described in one system to the other? So unifying that does not necessarily mean investing in new technology and doing development, but you want to understand, well, how different is this? And we can have differences and be intentional about it. That's fine. But we don't want to be unintentional about that. And we can say, well, this system needs to be rationalized with this system because they have overlapping functionality. But for now, we're going to use this system primarily for the following things. We can use this one for these things. And guess what? We don't need to rationalize the attributes because we're not consolidating that. Whatever it is, I'm just making up an example. But my point is that having that blueprint, having that current state understanding of the tools you have, the shape of the data and the content and the information and the attributes, the consistency of that, and really getting that comprehensive picture so that you can say, okay, if this is our desired future state, how far do we have to go? And what can we do to get there with provable quick wins as we are developing this bigger picture? Many times you can build this on top of an existing project. We're doing this with content strategy for one organization. We're doing it with product information for another organization. These are big initiatives, but my point is that the point here is that they are that they should be part of larger initiatives. Can be part of larger initiatives that you can bolt onto and just do this discovery along with that, because ultimately you should have that understanding of how these systems are architected. Any other questions? I see that was one question. I think there's another question coming in that talks about, how do you prioritize, these efforts? So if, again, it looks big and scary and difficult, what's the way to prioritize? And the way we do this is we actually do this based on the customer journey. And we have a mechanism that I wish I threw a slide in on this, but it looks at all the technologies that you use to serve the customer along each stage of the journey. You might have different journeys for different customer types. That's fine. But when you're doing this, you look at the tools. So what part of the journey is most problematic? You want to focus on that. And then you want to say, how many different tools do we have supporting each stage of that journey? And then the question you want to ask is, how important is that tool to that stage? So maybe you have a marketing suite that does a lot of things, but it's not going to be important to every stage. So, maybe you have a knowledge base that's important for, service and support, but it's not necessarily going to help you with the learn stage of the buyer journey. That's more marketing technology, right? So what you're doing is you're saying, for these technologies, what role do they place at each point in the journey? And then how well are we deploying them? So there's kind of a two-tier score to this. What's the journey? What are the tools supporting each stage of that journey? How important is a particular tool, especially have multiple tools, to that journey stage? And then the other score is, how well are we deploying it? And that depends on the number of factors. But in some cases, you're like, we're doing a pretty good job. And you know what? It's important, but we're okay. Hey, over here, what you want is the high priority, poorly deployed technologies, right? So you can start to really focus in on what's important, because otherwise it's a massive, ball of yarn. It's a big problem. But using the customer journey, looking at the tools that support each stage, and then looking at how important they are, for that stage, especially if they serve multiple, and then how well we're deploying it. And usually it's a red, yellow, green. So you're looking for high value tools with a red, deployment. High value for that stage, poorly utilized and deployed. And that gives you a way of prioritizing all of that. I think that's it for questions. We're happy to chat. Feel free to drop us a note and let us know if you'd like to dig into any of these areas. And we have other stuff around the marketing technology evaluation. We have stuff around any of these areas that you may need help in, whether it's customer data, product data, content, or knowledge management. And all of that should also be in support of automation and things like virtual assistants. Virtual assistants are not a separate thing, and content to support that is not a separate thing. This is all content. This is all knowledge. This is all data. Any final thoughts, Dave, before we let everyone back to the day?
As we already suggested, we've got more recommended reading. Those are our recommendations in the resources here. Always please go to our site. There's a wealth of information on related topics. And if you haven't connected with us on LinkedIn or follow us in Information Science on Twitter, please do so, because we're always publishing new thinking and new insights on these very topics.
All right. Well, listen, thank you all for your time. Please reach out. Please connect. Please let us know what your thoughts are. And Dave, thank you. And you all have a wonderful day.